Yeah, well, I want to focus in on that first paper that I was aware of. I think it was 2019, melatonin and the optics of the human body. One of, if not my favorite papers. I know a few doctor friends of mine also say it's their favorite paper. Um, and there's a few amazing graphs in there that talk about the folding of the brain and how those folds are actually somewhat designed in a way to ferry the light as far into the brain as possible. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant. Maybe you can help me clarify that. But um, first of all, people might be a bit weirded out by thinking that light makes it through the skull. So what's going on there?
Well, if you actually look at it, and I don't know if you've ever seen any of Roger Seaholt's videos. He has a couple of illustrations, and then there's a TED Talk where one of the ladies there I could send to you that does an illustration. But in the old days, if they were checking your sinuses out, they would literally take a red light, shine it up through your mouth and out so they could actually see what kind of occlusion, so they can see through the bone structure.
Yeah,
And it's like I say, it's hard for people to get the idea, but you can literally walk outside now with modern cell phone and you can put it up against your arm and have the sun coming through your arm and covering up and you can see the red window associated, or the biological window associated with going clear the way through your arm, through the
yeah,
bones and everything.
yeah.
But there's a big difference optically between absorption and scatter, you
Hmm.
know. And what happens is that the absorption coefficient goes down so low, even in bone, that you get the scattering effect, but it's not an absorption. But when people have tried to measure it, most of the people will go and take a lamb's head or whatever, and they'll stick a detector in there and they'll shine a light through it. They're not taking into account that that's not the way it works. In
Right.
order to measure a volume diffuser, it's a very difficult measurement because you have to take into account the fact that light is penetrating not only from this one spot, but multiple spots, and it's all additive in its sort of nature. And once you get through the skull, you got what it does is essentially actually a forehead acts like it's a really great filter. And the same thing happens with a woman's skin for the fetus in the womb. Is that literally it blocks the ultraviolet and invisible from getting down into the cerebral spinal fluid or into the amniotic fluid. And both of those have peak transmissions at 850 nanometers, well into the
Right.
near infrared.
Right.
And so what happens in our lighting world, we call that a light guide. Essentially, it has the cerebral spinal fluid is very clear. It doesn't have much scatter. And so it tends to propagate the light down into the fissures of the brain and makes this, amazing ability for the near infrared component uh, to propagate, like I say, propagate down into the fissures. And it's just so amazing when you look at a cross section of brain and you see the gray matter where it is and how it follows those fissures. And I know there's a lot more biology than all that, but from an optics guy standpoint,
Mm.
you kind of look at it and say, duh, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And we use light guides all the time in the lighting industry to propagate light down from one point to another. If you look at ceiling panels that have LEDs on them, the LEDs are on the edges and they're light guiding it down an acrylic or a polycarbonate guide. And then they're having little places where they extract the light. That allows you to get it uniform. And, I just don't believe that there's so many things that the body is doing optically to localize and collect near infrared and put it right where it needs to be, that it's on purpose. I'm
Mm.
sorry. It's
Yeah.
it's not just a happenstance that and you look at the mother's womb, how the skin starts as you go through the pregnancy, and eventually the skin starts to stretch. My wife and I were lucky enough to have twins, and she had 13 pounds of baby in her,
Wow.
and it went translucent. I mean, I could see through her basically, and so it's changing the spectrum. And there's all these indications that is important to how the fetus's eyes develop and other things develop. Is it gets introduced to this thing. And I was talking to some of the people in one of the neonatal units, and they were saying how they're starting to figure this out with neonatals. Is that everybody was under the assumption that the neonatal baby coming out would want darkness, but actually and quiet. And so they would literally go and they would cover the neonatal bassinets with towels and things like that to make it darker. But now what they're figuring out is that no, that it actually needs light. It needs light to come in and actually synchronize the baby. And so there's all this stuff that we're still trying to figure out. And this was just 10 years ago that people were looking at it this way. So,
Yeah,
but
that's incredible.
yeah, but the paper was mainly associated with trying to bring together Russell's work on extrapineal melatonin and link it up to what's going on with the near infrared component. And the idea that seems to be the most prevalent is that the near reactive oxygen species that's being generated in the mitochondria, melatonin is produced locally intercellular to that particular cell. And only when you get enough reactive oxygen species does enough melatonin get made to actually spill out into the other areas. So,
Is the
but
reason near infrared light causes an increase in this mitochondrial melatonin because the near infrared light helps the mitochondria produce energy more efficiently, so that as a result you're getting more reactive oxygen species?
well, I think it's really complicated to be quite honest. And you hit on the one of the things that came out of the data because see what we did with our data was our first work was is we combined optical ray tracing with the work on reactive oxygen species or free radical generation in
Yep.
skin.
Yep.
And if you that data actually came out of the cosmetic industry of all places, but what was it we were able to then show is that okay, the near infrared is generating these reactive oxygen species or free radicals all the way deep into the body. And if you make the assumption that there has to be an antioxidant response, of which melatonin is one of the more likely candidates,
Yep.
then it kind of makes sense, and you can kind of see that and in certain cases you get so much going on that you get an excess. And that seems to be following out of the data as well. So,
Mm.
um, I think there's a lot of questions as to what the exact reason that melatonin is being created. But I think with this new data coming out of during transient effects, during stressors like exercise,
Yep.
it's being generated is the bottom line. If it's not, where's it coming from? Because it's a whole lot of melatonin when you're sitting there pumping iron or something like that.